What's up, everybody? I hope you're doing well. If you've ever been an intern as a therapist, then you already know it does not pay well. And sometimes it doesn't even pay at all. If you're not a therapist or you haven't been through the intern part of being a therapist yet, I'd like to paint a picture of it for you at the beginning of this video. I have a feeling it's gonna be kind of a long video, so buckle your seatbelts. It's time for a bit of story time. I remember for my full-time pre-doctoral internship, I was paid a stipend of a whopping $300 a month. In other words, I worked full-time for 12 months and made $3,600 for that work that I did. Meanwhile, I paid my school at least $6,000 in tuition money in order to get credits for that work that I did. I was also working on my dissertation about 20 hours a week, so I was regularly pulling all-nighters in order to get my dissertation done. There was no time left over in my schedule to pull in extra income from somewhere else. And keep in mind, this was for my fourth-year internship when I was all done with all of my classroom learning. So essentially, I was working full-time and I was still accruing student debt. I mean, dang. Like, wow. Okay, now to be fair, this was my pre-doctoral internship. I didn't even have my degree yet. So for those of you out there who are not a therapist, let me paint this picture for you, because by the time I had gotten to my fourth year internship, I already had several thousand hours of clinical work under my belt. I also already had my master's degree after the first 2 years of schooling that I'd done as well. So to make zero money for the work that I was doing, where I was clearly implementing evidence-based treatments that I'd implemented now for 3 years, is pretty laughable. And though yes, I was still a trainee, I was receiving 4 hours in total between individual supervision and group supervision, 4 hours of training per week in exchange for working for free. It doesn't seem to add up in my mind. Now, I'm not at all telling this story as a complaint. It's really just to paint the picture of how difficult it can be to make ends meet when you're a therapist trainee. Once I graduated and I became a postdoc intern, I completed my hours by working part-time at 2 different private practices. They were 2 very different private practices, which we'll get into in a little bit. And at one of these private practices that I interned at, I calculated that I was averaging between $10 and $13 an hour, depending on the week. Now, again, I'm not complaining, just being clear, when you're an intern, it's really difficult to make ends meet. And even though now we can fast forward 10 years and I've had a lot of financial success in my career, and it's more than kind of made up for what happened then, that doesn't make it any easier for you to pay your bills while you're in it. Like, how do you actually pay to survive in order to cross those hurdles so that hopefully you can have that financial success someday? If you're currently an intern, or if you're kind of daunted at the prospect of maybe becoming an intern down the road someday, and you're concerned about the finances, it's a legitimate concern. Generally speaking, the pay is abysmal, but I think there are some things you can do to prepare. No, I don't think there's one right path for everyone to choose in order to help them make ends meet. There are options, and it's important to explore what all of your options are and to make an educated decision about what's the best path for you. This is by no means an exhaustive list, but here are at least a few options to get your gears turning to figure out how to make ends meet as a therapist trainee. Option number 1, take a more part-time approach to accruing your hours for licensure while you spend the rest of your productive working hours earning a more livable income. Because let's face it, it's really, really difficult to find anywhere that can offer you a livable income as an intern trainee. You may need to step outside of the therapy field in order to earn that livable income. As therapists, we have a lot of marketable skills, and depending on where you break into, there are a lot of places where you can actually generate quite a bit more income than minimum wage, so it's okay to leverage that. The downside, obviously, is that this is inevitably going to take you longer to be licensed, and it's delaying that higher income potential that you're going to have once you're licensed. It's a really tricky balance to say, okay, am I going to take 4 years, 6 years instead of 1 or 2 in order to get to licensure? I'm going to choose the 1 or 2 if they're all the same, but if the difference is during those 4 to 6 years, I can live comfortably and not worry about finances and maybe provide for my family, maybe I'm going to choose the 4 to 6 years if the difference means that in the 1 to 2 year option, I'm going to be stressed and anxious that whole time. AKA me. That was me. At least for me in my immediate circles and my cohort, pretty much everyone went all in on get those hours done ASAP. If you can see more clients than is even sustainable, so you can get licensed, so you can then earn that much more sustainable, livable wage, hopefully. And I suspect this may be because there's a little bit of stigma and shame around taking a step back, slowing down. You've already been in grad school for a really long time. Before that, you might have been an undergrad if you went straight through, and now you're talking about making it take even more time. And I know it feels painful to push that final destination further down the road. You know, why would I get somewhere going 20 miles an hour when I could get there going 60? But if it means that you can put food on the table and provide for your family and make sure that you don't have to worry, it may really be worth it. Option number 2, be picky about what internships you choose. Now, easier said than done, and if this was more accessible than it is, this would be the first item on the list. Just say, find an internship that pays better. If only it were that simple. But not all internships pay the same amounts, and so if you want to be picky about it, you sure can. I didn't have the option to move around unless I was open to being in a long-distance marriage, but if you're more of kind of a free agent, you're really open to moving around, maybe that even sounds exciting or interesting to you, I know there's a certain type of person in that category, then you could apply all over the place to internships everywhere and kind of pick and choose ones that pay a little bit better, maybe also choose locations with a lower cost of living, and of course, if it isn't the elephant in the room, if you know enough of my story, there's the option to pursue private practice. Now, I know this isn't necessarily an option in every state for every type of credential, and so make sure to check with your local jurisdiction to see if it's an option to be in private practice before you're licensed. In my state of California, as a psychologist trainee, there's very much a path to access working in private practice before you're licensed, and that's what I did. I worked in 2 private practices as a postdoc intern. Now, you might be wondering why I'm not advocating for this option right at the top of the list of these options, because the income earning potential as an intern in private practice can be quite high. But as I've learned, there's much more to be said than just saying like, hey, go all in on the private practice thing. I'll explain. There are a number of variables that you want to be mindful of in your application and interview process if you're pursuing working in a private practice setting as a trainee. So let me list those out, because depending on the answers, your pay is going to vary a lot. Number 1, maybe most obviously, what rate do interns get at this practice, and what cut of that rate would you receive? Obviously, the higher the rate, the better. Obviously, the higher the cut you get, the better. Number 2, does the practice still charge for late cancellations and no-shows? And if so, do you still get your cut of that amount as well? Number 3, does the practice accept insurance? And if so, who does the insurance billing? You or somebody else in the practice? And if someone's insurance claim is denied, do you still get a cut based on the full amount as though insurance reimbursed? Or do you only get a cut of whatever amount their copay might be? Number 4, super important question to ask. Are you in charge of your own marketing, or will somebody fill your caseload for you? I'll get into why this question is so important in a second. So to highlight how different it can be from one private practice setting to another, I'll describe the differences that I experienced in the 2 different private practices that I did my postdoc hours in, because they were very different. At one of the part-time private practices that I interned at, in the application and interview process, obviously the employer, who also would be my supervisor, was painting it as a lovely place to work. The charge was $90 a session, which even for that time was quite low in that location for an intern, but it still seemed reasonable. I would get 50% of the cut, so I thought, I'm gonna make $45 an hour. Not bad as an intern. I'm good with that. So I got offered that job, I accepted it, and here's how it actually played out. Yes, my full cash rate was $90 a session, and I would get 50% cut of that rate, but I also had a sliding scale that went down to $45 a session, and almost all my cash pay clients were paying $45 a session, which yes, I got a 50% cut of. Any of the clients that were able to afford a full cash rate, they were seeing my supervisor, who was charging $150 an hour. This practice also accepted insurance, so for my insurance-based clients, I got 50% of whatever their insurance reimbursed, which at that time in those days might be somewhere around $60 to $70 a session usually. But a lot of my insurance claims got denied. I was in charge of doing all of my own insurance billing. I spent an average of 3 to 5 hours per week on hold with insurance companies. If the claims got denied, I only got a 50% cut of my insurance clients' copays, which in those days usually was somewhere around $20 to $30 a session. So when all was said and done, I was earning $10 to $13 an hour at this practice, because a lot of my time was going to calling insurance, a lot of my clients' claims got denied. That was a really sucky job. Now, one thing that was true about that practice is my supervisor filled my caseload, like in a few weeks. I was always full at that practice all the time. That was never an issue. By comparison, the other practice that I worked at part-time, my cash rate was $120 per session, and I got a 60% cut of that rate. I did have a sliding scale. It slid down to $60 a session, but this practice was 100% cash pay. So all of my clients were paying cash rates between $60 and $120 per session, and I got a 60% cut of that rate. So we're naturally already starting off much higher per hour pay in this practice compared to the other one, because also, notes and billing is just so much faster when you're not navigating through insurance. On the flip side, I was 100% in charge of my own marketing. I probably got one client referred to me through that practice maybe every 3 months. So I was on my own with this one. At the time, I had no idea what I was doing, and it took me at least a year to fill my part-time practice at that location. So what ended up happening was, even though my earning potential was so much higher at this second practice, I ended up earning the same amount at both practices for the longest time. All that to say, if you can find a practice that genuinely gives you a decent hourly cut even when you get into the fine print of it, and that helps you fill your practice, like has active referrals that are just funneling straight onto your caseload, you could have a much higher income potential. I mean, by the time I was almost licensed and I finally filled my part-time practice at this second higher paying place, I was earning something closer to like $40-something thousand a year, seeing about 15 clients a week, which as an intern working part-time, I think that's a good deal. And mind you, this was also 10 years ago, so hopefully with inflation it'd be a little higher now. Another option to consider to help make ends meet is to delay internship. Now, I know that never feels good. We just talked about how hard it is to kind of kick the ball further down the road. But if it makes the most sense for you to delay that lower paying internship by spending some time working full-time, maybe in a nice salaried job, putting some money aside in savings for a little bit of time, and then coming back to doing those intern hours that tend to be underpaid while dipping into that savings. If that's what's best for you, go for it. Another option to explore is loan forgiveness. Now, this obviously doesn't like boost your budget or anything as an intern, but it can, again, offer some peace of mind if you know that you're working towards forgiving your student debt. I'll link to an article that covers more information about the types of loan forgiveness that are currently out there. I know this is something that's kind of in progress, changing a bit. Hopefully there will be even more options soon, but there are already some existing loan forgiveness options, so feel free to check out that article below. Okay, now the next tip is definitely stating the obvious, but also there's some nuance to it that I'd like to go over, and that's budget, budget, budget. Again, stating the obvious. If you have a limited budget, you have to budget. But one thing I've noticed is that for a lot of us, at least, by the time we're getting to that kind of internship phase of our career, a lot of our friends and close circles are in a phase of their careers where their income has already started to go up. That phase of life where the friends go, do you want to go eat at that nice restaurant with me? Are you free to go watch that movie? Are you free to just go on the zoo, an adventure? I don't know what. Most of the things people want to do together cost money. Meanwhile, we're trying to live on a very constricted budget relative to a lot of our friends, and it can feel really uncomfortable to say no. I definitely felt this way myself. I remember friends inviting me to things that cost money, but not a lot of money, like watching a movie or something like that that's relatively contained, and me feeling like, how do I tell them that I can't afford this without them throwing me a total pity party? I just didn't want my friends to feel burdened by my pretty tight budget. If we don't have our eyes on our budget on some regular basis, we can kind of like lose track of how much we're really spending. Like, I remember this would happen all the time where I think like, I didn't spend any money this month, and then we go into the budget and I'd log it in and realize I forgot I spent money there, I spent money here, and I ran out of budget in my for fun spending in the first week of the month. You kind of need to look at your budget on some regular basis without getting overly hyper-focused on it. It might need to be once a week, once a month might not be enough when you're on a really tight budget. Now, as I mentioned, I am sure this is not an exhaustive list of how to survive on an intern budget as a therapist. So if there's anything that you found useful or you are aware of that I didn't mention, please list it in the comments below. People do read those comments and it's super helpful. But whatever route you choose, whether it's one of the ones I mentioned or something different, I just want you to know you have options. Please be empowered to explore what those options are and know that you can make an informed decision. If you feel stuck in one route and it's not working for you, it's more than okay and healthy to see what other options are available to you and try to make the best informed decision. And before we close, I'd like to thank TherapyNotes.com for sponsoring this video. TherapyNotes helps with scheduling, notes, and billing, and so much more. They have a HIPAA-secure telehealth platform for you to meet with your clients. And if you'd like to check out TherapyNotes, you can get 2 months to try it for free with no commitment just by clicking the link in the description of this video. Well, whatever route you are taking towards licensure, give yourself a massive pat on the back because all routes towards licensure are challenging and you are doing the dang thing. So be proud of yourself. If you don't feel it, take it from me, receive it, because it's super hard and it will end. It's not gonna last forever, I promise. And until next time, from one therapist to another, or therapist trainee, you're a therapist too, I wish you well.